Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Between the Sharks. We're back on the 27 Ford. We kind of put it together, kind of slapped it together. It looks a lot further along than it is, but this has been very, very revealing. I've been staring at it for a long time, kind of assessing what we have and what we need. And, you know, let's dive in and I'll talk about what I've learned putting Model A parts and Model T parts together and just studying on it. Let's review what we're dealing with here in case you're trying to, figure it out. 1926-27 Ford touring body on a Model A frame that is essentially stock outside of being boxed and whatever else. It hasn't been extended, it hasn't been Z'd, it hasn't been anything. It's got the original cross members front and rear. The fenders, I believe, are 31 based on this seam right here. They are definitely Model A. They came off a coupe. I saw the car when I picked them up, and I just didn't remember the year, but I think that indicator is, the thing. This hood is a 27, I think. Pulled it out of the back of a barn, so I'm just basing that on the count of louvers and the length. 28 grill shell, 28 radiator for now, although it's kind of junk. Small block Chevy, whatever. Those are 16-inch 40s Ford wheels. That's just a leftover wheel I had that had an 820 15 tire on it. I think we'll be running 16s both, front and back, probably an 820 16 for the little bit of rubber rake, but that's getting ahead. Let's talk about fitment. All right, so I've never put a Model T on a Model A frame, but it's been done a million times, I'm sure. However, I've also never tried to put 1931 coupe fenders on a sedan length body, like touring body. We'll make it work. I landed a few things in here. Let's talk about what fits and what doesn't, and what we're gonna do about some of it, and like what the clues are that we saw. So the fenders actually line up with the original holes in the frame. So that's step one. Shove the front fenders on. The radiator goes right over the cross member, has notches for the fenders, so this is within, whatever. We can see here that this is kind of where the old body sat. And then we can see here that this fender wants to roll forward into this, it would bolt from here to here. So it needs to I guess basically what we're looking at is the body needs to come forward and roll, this fender would roll actually up a little bit. If we're looking in the back, the cross member, which is not dissimilar from the Model T frame cross member, is sitting similar to where it should, under where the rear seat would be. But if you can put your eyeballs, the rear end's not mounted, but it's kind of sitting in the right place-ish enough. The best I can assess is the center of the wheel well over here is the actual highest point. That would make sense. And it relative to the tire, it also feels like it could go forward. So, and then finally, when we had our hood on yesterday, I popped it off this morning to kind of see what was going on. The hood was about 3.5 inches short. So if we go with the hood measurement, radiator shell to the firewall, we got to move it about 3.5 inches forward, like this away, which means this starts to become a little bit closer. It means this seam comes a little bit closer to this, which is what it would be on a Model A, but that's different body. But the 3.5 inches here would also get us pretty close to making that line up. And the 3.5 inches here would make this rear tire well line up a little better with our rear wheel. So what I'm getting at is if we move this body 3.5 inches forward, we should be, but we do indeed, which is not a surprise and kind of something I may have anticipated, I don't remember. I think we've got to reverse the firewall, at the very least reverse it. And we'll look in closer at the thing that's keeping us from moving the body right now. All right, fellas, project of the day. So This is a 283 small block. I think it's 62. It doesn't matter. They're all basically the same in this many direction. This isn't the motor we'll be using. We've got another 283 tucked over there, but that's besides the point. The short version is our hood is 27 inches. And that should land basically from the front of the radiator shell to the little lip on the firewall. Now, we are at 30 inches right now. And everything's just kind of sitting, nothing's bolted down, whatever. But that tracks. We need 3 inches to, you know, condense this up front. That should make our rear fenders fit better, everything else. Now the problem is we can't do that. I had to pull this radiator cap off / knock it off just to get it this far. And now the firewall is directly against the distributor cap. In the past, I may have even said this, I'm gonna look back to the old video, that I may need to reverse this firewall, which is you take the firewall out like we've had in previous videos a million years ago, flip it around, and that puts this hump recess inside the firewall, which gets you a couple of inches. Now, it does put this recess further out, but at this point, I think it's pretty clear that we can see that, well, you know, we're gonna have to be modifying this to make it a firewall anyway. Let's take a closer look at that. So basically, that would become the front of the firewall, meaning this sort of hump area would turn around, would bolt back in the same spot, and then be recessed, you know, roughly to like here, which may be enough room for our distributor. I'm not 100% sure. We may have to notch after that. Now this will come further out, which is a problem, so we're gonna have to cut all of that, I'm sure. But as you can see here, this isn't doing much for firewall. We would like, it would be good to kind of close this in a way. So we had plenty of work cut out for us here anyway, but as you can see, this is a big HEI. We'll run stock points distributor, but that's, you know, again, not gonna be enough with this firewall here. So thus is the issue. So if you're running a small block Chevy in a Model A frame, this, you know, we could try to scoot the engine forward a little bit, but this feels right with the fan, and that's stock water pump, so it just feels right. So I think it's the way we're going to deal with it. We will need to get to a point where the distributor can come all the way out. Like, I do not want to put this thing together in a way that I've got to pull the body just to get the distributor out if the distributor gives it up. You do you, but bare minimum, you got to be able to get the cap off to adjust points or your electronic ignition or whatever's going on in there, depending on what you decide to run. But I'm a firm believer, you know, that hot rod ought to be serviceable. So for us, it means it's time to, you know, kick the old bird out of the nest and hope that the work that we've done after we added all of this bracing is good enough to hold everything in place, because if it's not, we're about to find out. Because all of this internal bracing needs to go. Then I've got 2 little welds in the bottom, which I'm regretting doing now, but everything else I pretty much just sheet metal screwed, understanding this might be an issue. And then at some point I forgot and welded the front braces on and all of that stuff. And then once the firewall's out, we'll slide the body forward, see how she looks, and then come up with a plan to modify this firewall to make it do all the things that we needed to do to fit this or any similar motor. So we went ahead and knocked the firewall out, which, you know, wasn't that big a deal. It was those dumb spot welds I put in the bottom corners here that kind of made that more of a task than it needed to be. Yeah. We are going to line up kind of front to back, then back to front. We got to go from basically the radiator to the firewall, and then in the back, I've tried to line up our wheel well with the fender apron, just because that's kind of how it would be. I knocked the rear end around because it's not attached to anything, but it goes directly under this cross member. So let's just spend some time kind of like tweaking and fudging and lining up, and then we'll see what the relationship of our distributor is to our firewall. And maybe the reverse firewall will be enough. Maybe we'll have to modify it a little further than that, or recess it and then like reverse it, then recess it. I don't know. It's a hot rod, we'll figure it out. Not that worried about it. All right, so I don't want to do this, but I picked up an El Cheapo aluminum radiator because Brassworks radiators and whoever else makes the fancy ones, I can't remember the name. Griffin makes brass radiators. This one is beautiful with the honeycomb and all of that stuff, but I took it to the radiator shop and they said it cannot be saved, which I'm honestly, I mean, it's been patched a bunch. It's been, you know, speaking of, there's not a return anymore. It's been closed. It's really hammered. Take a look. But it's a beautiful wall hanger. So considering we're doing some mock-up-y stuff, I think I am gonna go ahead and try to fit the aluminum one and see if that's, you know, kind of the thing. Somewhere around here I bought a radiator mount bolt kit with the springs and the rubber pads and all that, but for some reason I just can't seem to find it. All right, we can all agree that doesn't look nearly as good, but it doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look good. The fit's kind of garbage as well. Like seeing this weld seam and this weld seam here. I'm not gonna cry about it. Maybe I'll get like a stone guard anyway, like just a basic grill insert type of thing. Like really actually to legitimately protect that, because, well, that's an aluminum radiator. Stone could be a really bad day. And then maybe we can kind of like, we'll paint it down, quick coat of black, and then, you know, it just looks very aluminum because it's very aluminum. It does actually fit all right. It looks like, you know, all my water necks and bits and pieces, so this will fit my rods. That looks like it will be indeed below the hood, which is great. We can reverse the water neck and Chevy it over this way. I don't know why that's facing that way, actually. Is that normal? I can't remember. I feel like, yeah, I feel like they're normally facing the other way. That's unusual, but we'll get over it. Let's take a look over here. Looks like our fan will just barely clear that guy, which is good, and we can probably, you know, shift things just a little bit if we need to. It would be good to get the fan up a little bit into that radiator. So that's one of the things we're going to look at here is once we get the body sort of in the right place, we not only have to deal with the firewall for the engine and figure out that relationship, but also the height, because bringing the motor up a little bit, we get the fan a little higher, which would be good, closer to the center of the radiator. And, you know, lifting the engine up, keeping the oil pan off the ground on a lowered car is a pretty good idea. You know, it's like the front wheels go over a speed bump and then the engine's like back here. So anyway, it's a lot to, you know, everything's going to be a compromise. I mean, obviously we don't want the carburetor sticking out the top. We're not doing like an Ed Roth drawing here. But I really like the way the hood looks, so it's got to be under there with an air cleaner. So we'll balance all of those things. All right, team, so I have jostled and pushed and pulled and whatever. But right now, what I'm focusing on mostly is the length issue. Right at the moment, the hood feels short, which I believe it's within an inch, and it's actually longer than a Model A hood, relative to the body landing right there on the apron. So for experiment's sake, I'm gonna go ahead and fit this rear fender in some way and see how it looks. And if that looks good, well, we're just gonna have to debate, because either, at least from this perspective right now, just sweating it out, kind of messing with stuff, I feel like something's got to give. Either the hood's got to get longer, which would help us in engine land, or the back fender's got to get modified. And I don't really know which one, and it's a hot rod, so it doesn't really matter. But I want to confirm that that's actually the truth, that one of those two things has to change, because I just don't know that it would. I mean, the only other piece of evidence I have is that's lined up here. You can tell the old firewall went to here. So if I slide this firewall forward to that like spot, well, that's going to be off. Maybe it's fine, I don't know. But remember, Model T versus Model A, they're only a year apart, but they're different models, so something's not going to fit. All right, I've wrestled this a lot, and there's no two ways about it, but this rear fender is gonna need love no matter what we do. I think the original Ford fenders actually kind of tucked in, came up, and then kind of rode just above this line. And clearly, these fenders tucked into the body that much on the coupe. So we're gonna have to deal with all of that. You know, there's something kind of cool about this line. I think on the actual Model Ts, the fender just gave a more rounded circular profile. It's a hot rod. We'll just do our best with it and kind of church it up to look right. That leaves the hood, and I can either fit the car to the hood and work backwards, and maybe that's what I should do, and just see where that leaves the rear fenders. And if that looks not so good, then maybe we split the difference. Maybe we extend the hood a little bit and we go ahead and modify the fenders as needed. But this is just going to take some brain thinking and some eyeballing, like A, what's going to look best, and B, what's going to serve our function. Even with the hood not quite long enough, we're set back, man, like way back. It's not like extending the hood would hurt us, and if it's not like excessive and we extend it right here in the front, it's just gonna make this line like longer and sleeker, which is pretty cool. Like, who doesn't want that? Let's try to land the hood and put it on the car, see how it looks, see what that does to the engine, see what that does to the fender, and then work from there. We're learning quickly. A couple things. First of all, because the grill shell is significantly taller on a Model A, this is, you know, this line is a little bit off. I could live with it, but if we're straight up on the radiator, we are not so good on the body. So if you can imagine, if the front came down, this would swing back, and that would close that gap. A couple options for that. We could switch and run a Model T radiator. We could lower the radiator into the car. We could modify that cross member that it sits on. I don't really know how to chop a radiator, and that sounds like a really bad idea, even though I know it's been done in the past. But that's only one of the problems. The other problem is the Model A wheelbase is 3 inches longer than the Model T wheelbase. So even with this arrangement, we work our way to the back of the car. If we imagine that the high point of this wheel arch is the center of it, which is just sort of the general thing that I'm going for, general guess right now is what I'm saying, that we are off. I don't know if the camera distorts it in any way, but we're a couple of inches too far forward for our rear end. And I'm judging that based on the cross member, because we are going to run a spring over rear end. So what that means is, to line the wheel well up that's attached to the rest of the body, we've got to go undo everything we did and which is nothing, just shifting things around, and slide the body back that way. Now that I've gone ahead and done all this work, just, you know, to prove what we've got to do or kind of figure it out, I'm going to try to undo it so that you fellers here can kind of see where the motor is sitting currently in this orientation. I know there's a lot of ways to do a lot of things, so by no means consider this any kind of gospel on small block Chevy and Model A frame or anything like that. Come on, Clamp, do my bidding. Do this. Come on, gather around, gather around. I'm not saying this is everybody's reality, but this is the reality I am looking at. I have seen a bunch of other people's cars that don't seem to have this problem, you know, exactly, but it's really hard to tell if they're on stock frames or custom frames or whatever. But here's what we're looking at. We're looking at a small block Chevy just guessed at with these motor mounts, and we're actually pretty good as far as distance from the radiator. We're probably, you know, 2 inches from the radiator with our fan. So yeah, maybe we could go forward a ½ an inch or so, and we'll measure that exactly. There's not a whole lot of room to go this way, and if you can tell, I'm all the way into this breather here as far as the body goes. And that does kind of line up with the marks on our fenders of where the Model A firewall was. But that's inconvenient, to say the least. Getting the distributor out will be a challenge under any circumstances. All right, so looking at how this motor is, it looks kind of goofy to begin with. And then on top of that, we've got some goofiness in the rear end for sure, because if the wheels are not centered in the wheel well, it's just going to look dumb. By moving the body back and centering the wheel wells, we're going to gain more space for our engine, and that means our hood won't fit, but, well, we can modify it or build another one, or, you know, what if we just, hang on, just bear with me. I'm going to slide the body back for the 28th time. It's not bad for second place. Black motor, several carburetors. We could make a thing of this, you know what I mean? If I'm being honest, I do want to run the hood. I think it's cool. You don't see full hooded hot rods very often, but that's not really the point. I think there's something neat about like the way they fold up and the louvers and all the stuff. Like it just also carries the line in a neat way from the, you know, from the radiator all the way back to the body. There's something about the way that I'm also building this car that, you know, just like the one in the movie, this one, there's something about how big it feels. Like it feels a lot bigger than a lot of the hot rods that we've been seeing for the last 20 years that are chopped and channeled and lowered and, you know, fenderless and all that stuff. And I think they're super cool, but it's pretty amazing that these touring cars were like the size of horse-drawn carriages. And they're, you know, when I'm standing towards the back of this car and it's gonna have a lowering spring and stuff, we're gonna run a full Model A spring, the back end of this car is gonna be tall. And it's not the fad right now, but there's something, it does it for me. So that's what we're gonna do with this car. So anyway, we'll figure out the hood later, but there is no question, if we don't figure out how to get the wheel centered in this wheel well, this whole car is gonna look cattywampus, and that's not good. So we gotta start with the rear end now. All right, gang, that was a lot of pushing things around, using our eyeballs, kind of assessing the give and take of putting a Model T body on a Model A frame. Learned a couple of things. There are gonna be some compromises to make, that's for sure. The engine looks best next to the firewall with the back of the car lining up with the fender apron, which actually kind of centers our wheel well. So that does cheese our hood, but you know, whatever. That may be the sacrifice we have to make. We're making a hot rod, so we may have to make a custom hood, which we can do that or modify, but you know what I'm saying. First things first, it looks like we've got to get a rear end mounted in this car, and we've got to get our wheel well lined up on the center of our wheel. The 3-inch difference in wheelbase between the Model T and the Model A is making itself apparent, to say the least. But getting that rear end mounted and even choosing the rear end we're going to use, because we already have 2 here waiting, and we'll get into all of that, but that is a different ball of worms. All right, as always, thanks for watching Between the Sharks. Good luck on your projects out there. Please consider subscribing if you haven't yet. It helps the channel a whole bunch. If that's not your bag, that's fine too. We'll see you next time on Between the Sharks.